The little girl tugged on Daniel Cole's sleeve while he stood in his own kitchen reading a shipping contract he didn't care about anymore. "Excuse me," she said, in that careful, formal way small children use words they've practiced. "Why do you look like my father?" Daniel looked down. 4 years old. Missing one front tooth. A juice cup in one hand and in the other, something small and folded, worn soft at the corners like it had been carried in a pocket for a very long time. He almost laughed it off. Almost said something easy, something adults say to children who ask strange questions. "I get that a lot, sweetheart," and went back to his contract. Then she opened her hand and held the photograph up to him. Daniel Cole, 38 years old, who had negotiated 9-figure port deals without blinking, who had sat across from men who wanted to ruin him and never once lost his composure, felt the blood leave his face. He knew every line of the man in that photograph. He had seen that exact face in the mirror that morning. He had never seen this photograph before in his life. Sophia. A woman's voice, sharp with alarm, cut across the kitchen. Renata Vega, the new housekeeper, was already crossing the room, already reaching for her daughter's hand, already trying to fold the photograph back into that small fist before Daniel could look any closer. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Cole. She wasn't supposed to. Where did she get that?" Daniel's voice came out rougher than he intended. Renata's hand froze on her daughter's shoulder. "I need to know where she got that photograph," Daniel said again, quieter this time, but somehow that made it worse. Renata looked at him the way a person looks at a door they've been dreading for a long time. "It's her father," she said. "It's a photo of Sophia's father." Daniel Cole did not have a brother. He had grown up an only child, doted on and lonely in equal measure, the sole heir to a shipping empire his family had built over 3 generations along the Georgia coast. There was no brother. There had never been a brother. So why was he looking at his own face on a stranger's photograph, worn thin from a 4-year-old's hands? What would you have done in that moment? Because Daniel Cole was about to find out that the life he thought he understood had a locked room in it, and somebody had just handed his housekeeper's daughter the key. 3 weeks earlier, Renata Vega had walked into the Cole estate with 1 suitcase, 1 daughter, and a resume that listed 6 years of housekeeping experience and nothing else. The agency had vouched for her. Daniel's assistant had run the standard background check. Clean record, no debts, no red flags. He hadn't thought twice about it. He was 3 weeks from marrying Vivien Hale, and his attention was elsewhere. Seating charts, caterers, a fight with his mother about the guest list that had gone on for 2 days. He hadn't asked Renata a single personal question beyond her availability to start immediately. He hadn't wondered why a woman with a small daughter would want to live in, rent-free, at a stranger's estate instead of finding work closer to family. He hadn't wondered at all why she had specifically applied for a position in his household, out of the dozen wealthy families in Savannah who used the same agency. He would wonder about all of it later. But that morning in the kitchen, all he could think about was the face in the photograph. "Sit down," he said to Renata. It wasn't a request. He sat. Sophia climbed into her mother's lap and watched Daniel with the open, unashamed curiosity that only children have, the kind that makes adults uncomfortable because it has no cruelty in it, only questions. "Start with his name," Daniel said. "Marcus." Renata's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "Marcus Ellery." The name meant nothing to Daniel. He said so. "I didn't think it would," Renata said. He didn't know his real name either. Not for a long time. But that wasn't the strangest part. "He grew up in Beaufort," she continued. "Raised by a couple named Ellery. Good people, he always said, kind people. He didn't find out he was adopted until he was 17, going through his mother's. His adoptive mother's, things after she passed. There was a letter. No name on it. Just a date of birth and a hospital in Savannah. And a line that said the birth mother had asked that the child be placed with a family who would never speak of the Cole name. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not possible." "I have the letter," Renata said. "I have more than the letter. I have 5 years of him trying to find out who he really was, Mr. Cole. And I have a daughter who is going to grow up asking why her father isn't here to answer her questions himself, because he died before he ever got the chance to knock on your door." The kitchen went very quiet. Sophia, sensing the shift in the air the way children always do, pressed her face into her mother's shoulder. "He died," Daniel repeated. 4 years ago. Car accident on the Beaufort Bridge, 6 months before Sophia was born." Renata's voice cracked just slightly on the last word, and then she pulled it back together, the way a person does when they've had a long time to practice grieving quietly. "He never got to hold his daughter. And he never got to meet the brother he spent the last 3 years of his life trying to work up the courage to contact. He never saw it coming, and now neither had Daniel." "You're telling me," Daniel said slowly, "that I have a twin brother, that he was given away at birth, that he found out on his own at 17 from a letter, and he spent years trying to find me and never did." "He found you," Renata said. "He just never told you. He used to drive past the Cole Maritime building sometimes, just to look at it. He kept a folder of newspaper clippings, every deal, every interview, every photo of you he could find. He said it felt like looking at himself in a mirror that was living a completely different life." She swallowed. "He was afraid. He thought if he showed up, your family would think he wanted money. He wanted to wait until he had something of his own first. Something that proved he wasn't just reaching." "And you," Daniel said. "Why are you here? Why didn't you come to me the moment he died?" Renata's chin lifted. For the first time since she'd sat down, there was something besides grief in her face, something closer to steel. "Because I tried once," she said. 2 years ago. Called your office. I asked to speak to you personally, said it concerned a family matter. Your assistant took a message. Nobody ever called back. I didn't have the money for lawyers, and I wasn't about to show up at a billionaire's front gate with a toddler and a story that sounds, on paper, exactly like every con artist's opening line. So I waited. Save. I applied for this job because it was the only way I could think of to get close enough to tell you the truth face to face, where you could see it in my eyes instead of hearing it secondhand from a stranger on the phone. You could have told me the first day, Daniel said. I was going to, Renata said. I promise you I was building up to it. I didn't expect a 4-year-old to do it for me over breakfast. Despite everything, despite the room tilting slightly under him, Daniel felt something close to a laugh catch in his throat. It died quickly. There was too much else in the way. I need proof, he said. I'm not accusing you of lying. I'm telling you that a man in my position cannot simply believe a story, no matter how it makes him feel. I know, Renata said. That's why I kept everything. A letter, the adoption paperwork, photographs, and a DNA kit if you're willing. She looked down at her daughter, who was watching Daniel with those same searching eyes. I have proof, Mr. Cole. What I don't have is time to waste convincing you I'm not trying to steal from you. So take whatever precautions you need. Just don't punish her for asking an honest question. Nobody in that kitchen knew yet that the hardest part wasn't the truth. It was who was about to try to bury it. Vivien Hale found out 3 days later, and she found out the way she found out everything, before Daniel had decided how to tell her. She had hired her own investigator months earlier, quietly, the way any smart woman marrying into that kind of money would. Not because she suspected Daniel of anything. Because Vivien Hale had grown up watching her mother get blindsided by a husband's secrets, and she had promised herself a long time ago that she would never be the last person in the room to know something that concerned her own future. The investigator's report on Renata Vega came back thin, clean background, nothing alarming, until a supplementary note 2 pages later, added almost as an afterthought. Subject's late partner, Marcus Ellery, deceased. Adoption records under seal, Chatham County, 1988. Preliminary facial comparison flagged for review. Recommend further investigation given proximity to client's household. Vivien read that line 4 times before she understood what it meant. She found Daniel in his study that night, staring at a folder of documents Renata had given him. Hospital records, the sealed adoption file Renata had spent 2 years and most of her savings unsealing through a lawyer, a DNA lab's pending results form. Tell me this isn't what I think it is, Vivien said from the doorway. Daniel looked up, and something in his face told her it was exactly what she thought it was. I have a brother, he said. Had. He's dead. And apparently he had a daughter, which means the Cole family trust just got a new potential beneficiary, Vivien said. Her voice was very calm. To come. Daniel, do you understand what that trust language actually says? All direct descendants of Augustus Cole, acknowledged or otherwise. Your grandfather wrote it that way on purpose, because he had his own scandals to worry about. If this child is legally recognized as your niece, she is entitled to a share, not a gift, legal share, of everything. I don't care about the trust right now, Daniel said. I care that my brother spent his whole life a few hours from here and I never knew he existed. I understand that, Vivien said, and for a moment her voice softened, and Daniel almost believed she meant it. I do. But you have to think clearly right now because I promise you, other people already are. She crossed the room, sat on the edge of his desk. That housekeeper waited until 3 weeks before our wedding to let this come out. Through her daughter. In front of you, unscripted, so it would hit you exactly like this. Off guard, emotional, no time to think. Does that not strike you as convenient? Nobody saw the second twist coming. Not even the man it was aimed at. She tried to reach me 2 years ago, Daniel said slowly. Before either of us knew anything about a wedding. So she says. Vivien's tone had an edge to it now. Daniel, I'm not saying she's lying about the brother. Maybe that part is even true. I'm saying a single mother with no savings just found her way into a billionaire's house. And within a month, his housekeeping staff is discussing inheritance law. I've seen this play out before. Not with you, with my mother. Sweet-talking, sympathetic strangers who show up right when there's money on the table. She reached out and took his hand, and her voice dropped, gentle now, persuasive. Let me handle it. Quietly. I'll have our lawyers verify everything properly, discreetly, without her knowing we're watching. If it's real, we deal with it the right way, through proper legal channels, not through emotional ambushes in your own kitchen. And if it's not, it's real, Daniel said. But even as he said it, he heard the smallest crack of doubt in his own voice, and Vivien heard it too. But there was one problem neither of them saw yet. Vivien wasn't planning to verify anything. She was planning to make it disappear. The setback came on a Tuesday, 4 days before the wedding rehearsal. Daniel came home to find Renata's room cleared out. Not packed, cleared, hastily, drawers hanging open. A child's stuffed rabbit left behind on the floor like it had been dropped in a hurry. His household manager told him, awkwardly, that Ms. Hale had handled the staffing matter that afternoon while he was at the office. Ms. Vega had been let go. Immediate termination, cause listed as breach of employment contract, solicitation of the employer. Daniel found Vivien in the garden, going over floral arrangements with the wedding planner as if nothing unusual had happened. You fired her. I protected you, Vivien said, not even looking up from the sample of white peonies in her hand. Daniel, I had our lawyer review her contract. There's a clause, standard in every staffing agreement, against employees using their position to pursue personal financial claims against the employer. She violated it the moment she brought that photograph into your kitchen instead of going through proper legal channels. She's the mother of my niece, Daniel said. If this is even true, and you keep saying it might not be, then firing her doesn't make it less true. It just makes us look like we're trying to bury it. Or it makes us look careful, Vivien shot back, finally meeting his eyes. Do you have any idea what it will do to us, to the company, to the wedding, to everything we've built, if this leaks before we control the narrative? A tabloid story about a hidden Cole heir discovered by a 4-year-old is exactly the kind of thing that ends up on every gossip site in the country by Friday. I am trying to protect you from becoming a headline. You're trying to protect the trust, Daniel said quietly. There's a difference, Vivien, and I think you know it. Something flickered behind her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but something close to it, gone as fast as it appeared. I'm trying to protect us, she said. Both of those things can be true at once. Everything Daniel thought he understood about the woman he was about to marry was about to change, and not in the way anyone expected. He drove to the small apartment complex on the edge of town where the agency's records listed Renata's emergency contact address. He found her sitting on the front steps in the evening heat, Sophia asleep against her shoulder, 2 suitcases beside her because she had nowhere else to be yet. "I didn't do this," Daniel said before she could speak. "I want you to know that. I didn't ask for you to be fired." Renata looked up at him, exhausted, wary. "It doesn't really matter who signed it, Mr. Cole. The result is the same. Call me Daniel." He sat down on the step below her, an odd small gesture from a man who owned half the port. "I want the DNA test. Today, if a lab is open. I want to know the truth, and then I want to figure out what happens next. Not because of any trust, not because of any headline. Because if he was really my brother, I owe him more than I've given him so far. Which is nothing." Renata studied his face for a long moment, the same face that had haunted her for years in photographs, now sitting on cracked concrete steps looking more lost than she'd ever seen a rich man look. "There's a 24-hour lab 40 minutes from here," she said finally. "I already have Sophia's kit. I was saving it, in case anyone ever needed real proof instead of my word." Neither of them noticed the black sedan idling half a block away. Vivien's investigator, still on retainer, still watching, still reporting back everything he saw. The lab results wouldn't be ready for 72 hours, and Daniel found he couldn't sit still for a single one of them. So he drove to Beaufort. He told no one where he was going. Not Vivien, not his assistant, not even his mother. He simply got in the car early the next morning with the address Renata had given him, an old bungalow on a quiet street lined with live oaks, and drove 2 hours north with the radio off, trying to prepare himself for a version of his own life he'd never been allowed to see. The house belonged to Carol Ellery, Marcus's adoptive mother's younger sister, who had kept a spare set of his things in her attic ever since the funeral because, she said, nobody else had wanted to be the one to throw them away. She was in her 70s, sharp-eyed, and she studied Daniel on her front porch for a long silent moment before she finally spoke. "Lord," she said, "you really are the spitting image." She let him in without asking a single question about why he'd come, as if she'd been waiting years for exactly this visit. The attic held 4 cardboard boxes. Report cards. A high school letter jacket, blue and gold, Beaufort High. A fishing rod he'd apparently never quite mastered, according to Carol, who laughed about it fondly. And near the bottom of the second box, the folder Renata had mentioned. Newspaper clippings, dozens of them going back nearly a decade. Photographs of Daniel at ribbon cuttings. Business page profiles of Cole Maritime's expansion into the port of Savannah. A magazine feature with Daniel's face on the cover, the corner worn soft from handling, the way a photograph gets when someone has picked it up and put it down 100 times, trying to work up the nerve to do something about it. He had been watching me for years, Daniel thought, sitting on the dusty attic floor with his own face staring back at him from a stranger's. His brother's collection. And I never even knew to look for him. "He used to talk about you sometimes," Carol said, settling into an old rocking chair near the attic window. "Not often. He was a private man, kept most things close. But every once in a while, usually after a hard week, he'd get out that folder and just look through it. I asked him once why he didn't just call you up, get it over with. You know what he told me." Daniel shook his head, not trusting his voice. "He said he didn't want to be somebody's charity case. Said if he was ever going to walk up to a Cole and say I'm your brother, he wanted to walk up as somebody who'd built something of his own first, not somebody showing up with his hand out." Carol's eyes softened. "He was building a little contracting business, you know. Doing pretty well at it too the last couple years. Think he was close. I think if that accident hadn't happened, you'd have gotten a phone call within the year. But that phone call never came, and now the only voice left to tell Daniel who his brother really was belonged to strangers holding boxes of someone else's memories. Daniel spent 3 hours in that attic. He read report cards with handwriting eerily similar to his own. He found a photograph of Marcus at maybe 25, laughing at something off camera, one eyebrow raised in an expression Daniel had been told his whole life was uniquely, annoyingly his. He found a shoebox of letters from Renata, tied with a rubber band, and did not read them. Some things, he decided, belonged only to the people who wrote and received them, not to a grieving brother trying to fill in the blanks of a life he'd been denied. But he did find one more thing, folded at the very bottom of the last box. A half-finished letter, undated, in Marcus's handwriting, addressed to no one by name. "I keep starting this letter and I keep stopping," it read. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say to a brother I've never met. I don't even know if he knows I exist. But Renata's expecting and I keep thinking, if something ever happened to me, I'd want my kid to know she has family out there besides just me. Real family, not just people who share a last name on paper. So maybe I'll finish this one of these days. Maybe I'll actually send it." He never had the chance. Daniel drove home that evening with the folder on the passenger seat beside him. And for the first time since Sophia had whispered her question in his kitchen, he didn't feel blindsided by the truth anymore. He felt something closer to grief. Clean, uncomplicated grief. For a brother he'd never met but somehow already missed. The DNA results, when they finally came 2 days later, only confirmed what the attic in Beaufort had already told him with far more certainty than any lab ever could. The truth, when it finally surfaced in full, came from an unexpected source. Daniel's own mother. Eleanor Cole was 64 years old, immaculately composed even in crisis, and she had spent 38 years perfecting the art of not talking about the 6 weeks in 1988 that had nearly destroyed her marriage and her place in Savannah society. She had not expected to be having this conversation in her son's study, across from a lab report confirming what she'd known, quietly and privately, for years. "Say it," Daniel said. "Just say it, Mom. I've had enough half-truths this week to last a lifetime." Eleanor's hands were folded so tightly in her lap the knuckles had gone white. "There were complications with the twins," she said. "You know that part. You were born early, you were sick for the first month of your life, we nearly lost you. What you don't know is that there were 2 of you in that incubator, not 1. Daniel said nothing. He had learned over the last week that saying nothing was often the only way to get the whole story instead of the edited one. Your father's father, your grandfather Augustus, had very particular ideas about what a Cole family looked like in the newspapers, Eleanor continued, her voice thinning. There had already been talk that year about the business, about debts nobody was supposed to know about. He decided, without asking me, without asking your father, while I was still recovering and barely able to stand, that 2 infant sons born early, one of them sicker than the other, was a story that could be managed better as one healthy heir and a quiet, discreet placement for the other. He told everyone the second twin hadn't survived. He arranged the adoption himself, through people he trusted, to keep it sealed. By the time I was strong enough to fight him on it, it had already been done, and he told me that fighting it publicly would destroy what was left of the family's name, and possibly cost your father the company his whole life had been built around. The audience wasn't the only one shocked. Daniel had spent 38 years believing his grandfather had been a difficult but honorable man. "You knew," Daniel said. "All these years. You knew I had a brother out there, and you never told me." "I tried once he was grown," Eleanor said, and now there were tears in her eyes, the first Daniel had ever seen there. "I hired someone to find him quietly when he turned 25. I wrote him a letter. I told him everything, who he was, who you were, how sorry I was. He wrote back exactly once." She reached into the drawer of Daniel's desk. She had clearly planned this, had known where he kept things, mother's instinct even now, and pulled out a single folded page, worn at the creases from being read many times. Daniel unfolded it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and somehow impossibly familiar at once. "I don't hate you," it read. "I understand you were young and scared, and it wasn't only your choice to make. But I'm not ready to meet a brother who got to grow up as a Cole while I grew up wondering why my own family gave me away. Maybe someday. Not yet. Please don't write again until I do." He never wrote again. Eleanor had waited 13 years for a second letter that never came, too afraid of overstepping to try once more. And then, 4 years ago, a newspaper obituary from Beaufort had ended the possibility forever, and she had grieved a son she'd barely known how to reach out to, in complete silence, alone. "Why didn't you tell me any of this after he died?" Daniel asked. "Why let me find out from a 4-year-old's photograph?" "Because telling you meant admitting what your grandfather did," Eleanor said. "And admitting what I let him do. I have spent 38 years telling myself I would find the right moment, and there was never a right moment, and now I've run out of time to pretend there might still be one." The audience could feel the weight of 38 years of silence finally breaking, but the story wasn't finished yet. There was still one person who had known the truth and chosen, deliberately, to bury it a second time. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study with Marcus's half-finished letter in one hand and his mother's 13-year-old reply from Marcus in the other, trying to reconcile the two men, the brother who'd been too afraid to reach out, and the grandfather who'd made sure he never got the chance to. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, he called Renata, even though it was late, even though he had no real reason to accept that she was the only person left who had actually known Marcus as a whole, living person instead of a folder of clippings and a sealed adoption file. "I keep thinking about what he wrote," Daniel said when she picked up, groggy but awake. "That he didn't want to show up as somebody's charity case. I keep wondering if he'd even want any of this now. The trust, the acknowledgement, any of it." "He wanted his daughter to have family," Renata said quietly. "That's what he wanted, Daniel. Not money. Not a headline. Just people who'd claim her, out loud, without hesitating." There was a pause on the line, the sound of her adjusting the phone, checking on Sophia asleep in the next room. "You already did that. The rest is just paperwork." It was the first time she'd called him Daniel instead of Mr. Cole. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. "I have to deal with Vivien first," he said. "Properly. She deserves to hear it from me before it becomes a legal matter instead of a personal one. Are you sure you can still marry her, knowing what she did?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I know I can't stand up in front of 200 people and pretend I don't." The wedding rehearsal dinner was 2 days later, and Vivien Hale had not counted on Daniel bringing a folder with him to the private dining room instead of a toast. "Before we start," Daniel said, standing at the head of the table while 40 guests, his mother and Vivien's parents, watched, "I need to say something, and I need Vivien to hear it in front of the people who care about both of us." Vivien's smile stayed fixed in place, but her eyes had already gone tight with alarm. "4 days ago, I learned I have a niece," Daniel said. "Her name is Sophia. She's 4 years old. Her father was my twin brother, a man named Marcus, who I never had the chance to meet because our family made a decision 38 years ago that none of us are proud of. I've spent this week trying to understand what that means for my family, and I've also learned something else." He looked directly at Vivien now. "I've learned that the woman I asked to marry me had a full investigator's report identifying my brother's existence, and instead of bringing it to me honestly, she used it to have an innocent woman fired and quietly discredited, to protect a trust clause, before I even had the chance to learn the truth for myself." A murmur moved through the room. Vivien's father set down his glass. "Daniel, that's not." Vivien started, low and urgent. "I have the termination paperwork," Daniel said. "Have the timeline. I have the investigator's report, which somebody on your payroll was kind enough to forward to my lawyer this morning, apparently having a late change of conscience." He kept his voice even, not cruel, just certain. "I don't think you're a monster, Vivien. I think you were scared of losing everything you'd built a future around, and you made a choice out of that fear instead of trust. But I can't marry someone whose first instinct, when my family got complicated, was to manage it instead of stand in it with me." Vivien's composure finally cracked, just slightly, just enough for the room to see the person underneath the careful polish. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, quiet enough that only the closest guests could hear, "to watch your whole future depend on staying exactly what people expect you to be. I have spent my whole life making sure I was never the person left standing when the money disappeared. Panic. I'm not proud of it. But I panicked because I was terrified, not because I don't care about you." Nobody in that room expected the billionaire's fiancée to be the one who ended up telling the truth in front of everyone, even if it was too late to save the wedding. I believe you, Daniel said gently now. I believe you were scared. But being scared doesn't make it right. And I need someone beside me who chooses honesty even when it's inconvenient. Sorry. The wedding's off. Vivien left the dinner without another word, and though the tabloids did eventually get a version of the story, a softened one, careful, without the ugliest details, nobody in Savannah ever heard Vivien Hale badmouth the Cole family afterward. She simply disappeared from that circle entirely, and started over somewhere quieter, and Daniel, for whatever it was worth, hoped she eventually found something to build that didn't require managing everyone around her. It took another 2 months to sort out the legal reality of it all. The trust language, the formal acknowledgement of paternity, the quiet, careful process of making sure Sophia's future was protected the right way, through lawyers and courts, not through kitchen table promises that could be taken back later. Daniel insisted on every bit of it being done properly, in writing permanently. There was a hearing, eventually brief and procedural, in a Chatham County courtroom that looked nothing like the dramatic scenes Renata had half expected from years of worrying about this exact moment. A judge reviewed the DNA results, the adoption file Renata's lawyer had spent 2 years working to unseal, and Eleanor's notarized statement acknowledging the circumstances of Marcus's placement in 1988. Took less than 20 minutes. At the end of it, the judge looked over her glasses at Sophia, who was sitting in the front row swinging her legs and coloring on the back of a legal pad, entirely uninterested in the proceedings that had just permanently rewritten her place in the Cole family. Congratulations, the judge said, not unkindly, to the room in general. It's not every day I get to make a family a little bit bigger instead of smaller. Daniel had expected to feel triumphant, or at least relieved. Instead, walking out of that courtroom with his mother on one arm and Sophia's small hand gripping 2 of his fingers on the other side, he mostly just felt like something that had been broken for 38 years had finally, quietly, been set back into its proper shape. But the part that mattered most happened on a Sunday afternoon in October, on the back lawn of the Cole estate, where Renata Vega, who had been offered, and had firmly declined, several enormous financial settlements before finally agreeing to a modest trust fund for Sophia's education and nothing more for herself, sat in a lawn chair watching her daughter run through the grass with a man who, for months earlier, she had been terrified to even speak to. "Uncle Danny! Watch!" Sophia shouted, doing an extremely uncoordinated cartwheel that ended in a heap of giggles. "That was incredible," Daniel called back, and meant it, in the specific, overwhelmed way a person means things when they are still getting used to loving someone they only just met. He had a photograph now too. A real one, framed, sitting on his desk at the office where investors and board members could see it. Not a photograph of Marcus alone, the way Sophia still carried her worn one in a little box by her bed. A new photograph. Daniel, kneeling in the grass, Sophia on his shoulders, both of them laughing at something that had happened just outside the frame. He walked over and sat down in the empty chair beside Renata. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on getting the truth to me, even after everything." "I almost did more than once," Renata admitted. "The night before I applied for this job, I sat outside your office building for 2 hours trying to decide if it was even worth it. If I should just let it go, raise her without any of this, and never risk being called a liar or a con artist to your face. I'm glad you didn't let it go." "Me too." Renata watched her daughter chase a butterfly across the lawn, laughing at nothing, the way only very small children can. "She asks about him sometimes. Marcus. I tell her the truth, that he loved her before she was even born, and that he had a brother he never got the chance to meet, and that the brother turned out to be the kind of man who chose to love her anyway, once he found out she existed." Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. He just watched his niece running through the grass in the late afternoon light, carrying in her own small way the last living piece of a brother he'd lost before he ever had the chance to know him. "She has his laugh," Eleanor said quietly, coming up behind them with a glass of lemonade for Sophia, who abandoned the butterfly immediately in favor of the drink. Eleanor had visited every weekend since the truth came out, slowly, carefully, earning back a kind of trust that had taken 38 years to break and would likely take just as long to fully rebuild, but she was trying, in a way she'd never let herself try before. "She does," Daniel agreed. Sophia climbed back into her mother's lap, sticky-fingered and sun-warmed, and looked over at Daniel with the same open curiosity that had started this entire story in a kitchen 4 months earlier. "Uncle Danny," she said, "can I keep the picture of my daddy on your desk too? Next to the other one?" "Sweetheart," Daniel said, "you can keep it anywhere you want. It's part of this family now. So are you." If you were Daniel, would you have believed a 4-year-old's whispered question, or would it have taken you longer to see the truth standing right in front of you? Tell me what you would have done down in the comments below.